Oh, hello. This one may be a little tricky. I've got it worked out in my head and on paper. We'll see if this comes across. Loving the use of quadratic equations. Ironically, after researching the NEP framework for math and reading, I'm getting really into this framework. Anyway, so what we have here is I call this mind the gap, which is just my own play on words of mind the gap, which is like beware in Britain. To go onto the subway, you don't want to cross a platform because you could get injured. Anyway, it's just a play off of words for me, just called mind the gap, because I just feel like big business is mining the minds of minors, anybody 18 and below. So let's proceed. Just my hypothesis. But what we have, oh, and this is kind of funny to me. I actually got these four phrases like clarifier from a teacher from the NEP that I was just researching. Anyway, so clarifier. So we have the Department of Education. And under the Department of Education, we have the NAEP, the National Assessment for Educational Progress, the IES, Institute of Educational Sciences, and the NCES, the National Center for Educational Statistics. And what we're hearing about in 2023 are these gaps, this panic, this crisis in gaps of education from COVID. Here's my initial question. What gaps? It's almost like we just say, okay, there's gaps and we need to hurry. Okay, well, here's my research on gaps. There are two gaps. One is the achievement gap, which are gaps, according to the NAP, groups of ethnic, race, and gender differences. So, in my mind, those achievement gaps are very societal and systemic. They're race and gender based. So, yeah, there's gaps. The second one are learning gaps. And these are 5 gaps, according to research, which is mastery at grade level with skills, motivation, knowledge, environment, and communication. Okay. Predictor. These gaps give us an angle, which is a point of view, often an illicit means of obtaining an advantage, using artificial means to attain an objective and the direction from which someone or something is approached. Also known as usury. I'm kind of not sure how to do this. Maybe I should do this one at a time. Let's try this. So, clarifier, the Department of Education says there's a crisis in education. We have to close this gap. Well, in using the NAP and math standards, I thought, okay, well, let's use a right triangle. Yeah? So the gaps in my hypothesis, let's just say the opposite line, if you need a little refresher. Honestly, I haven't looked at trigonometry since I was in high school, which should tell you something. I don't think most people have. Anyway, so let's just say on a right triangle, you have the opposite and the adjacent lines. Let's just replace that with business management systems. The NAP board members, there's 26. Let's just say we divide this 13 and 13. 13 have business interests, meaning they're financially going to profit off of public education. And the other half, let's just divide this into the other 13, are management, which are policymakers, which are ensuring that policy is being made in the political best interest. So if we use a quadratic equation, if we use this right triangle, you are always going to be the hypothesis. The hypotenuse. You are always going to be the one stretched. Always going to be the longest line, and that's you, because you have business and management systems essentially fighting over you. Let's just say, hypothetically speaking, that's the case. And if that's the case, let's say business is 13, or the opposite angle. And let's say you have management is the adjacent line. Hypotenuse is going to be 18.385. Just trust me, I looked this up at 45 degree angles. Anyway, my whole point on this is no matter what, you have two huge business and management systems fighting over you. So what I'm saying is the gap is that during COVID, you slowed that gap down, meaning you did not make profits for these two that were satisfactory according to their projected profits. Just a hypothesis. Now the predictor, what I'm saying, the angle, well, linguistically, the angle is like, what's your angle, right? What's your point? Why are you doing this? And so I just thought, well, again, let's just go back to trigonometry. And so good old SOHCAHTOA, again, have not used this since I was in high school until now. SOHCAHTOA is sine, to find the angle, is the opposite over hypotenuse. The cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is the opposite over hypotenuse. Well, again, if we just use my hypothesis of the hypotenuse, it's always going to be business and management systems always seems to dominate over you. The student is what I'm saying here. So the hypotenuse linguistically means to stretch under, to employ for a purpose, to profit by, or take advantage of, or consume, which historically speaking, if you saw my other video, is called usury. So the question here, again, thank you, teacher, for giving me this. Questions might be, who defines these gaps? How are they interpreted, and again, by whom? Why the urgency after COVID? And that gaps over COVID slowed progress, which is the hypothesis. So to understand number sense, ratio, proportion, or percents, I don't know what makes more number sense than this. I don't know, maybe this does look confusing, but what happened is during COVID, students just stayed home more and they slowed down progress for this gap, is what my hypothesis is. So students, at what opportunity cost was that? Even after K through 12, we're looking at students, again, I bring up that there's a $1.7 trillion debt. I can't even get my head around that number. So we talk about number sense. I don't know what $1 trillion looks like, but it looks like there's a reciprocal relationship between these two. What students are losing versus what big businesses are gaining in profits for progress. How's that? Okay. Oh, and then the summarizer, I've just kind of made up my own thing. SOS, which is just save ourselves or save our students. I'm going to encourage that students take it upon themselves to learn what you need to, like what your needs are right now. And again, that's going to be my mission to continue. I just came up with my own thing called sad me parentheses, which is just the order of operations for math backwards. And let me explain this. In my summary, what I'm suggesting you do is go through the order of operations. Go to the original source. Let's go to the framework of the NAEP and explore that exponentially. Multiply that. Get as many points of view and perspectives as you can. Divide it, meaning then break it down to the lowest common denominator, whichever makes sense, the simplest forms, and then add or subtract as needed, like spices. And then my summarizer on this is, this was a quote in my research from the IES, that educational statistics, which in the 2023, just a couple months ago, said never let a good crisis go to waste, which is a quote from Machiavelli, an Italian during the Middle Ages, who the NEEP quote, or sorry, in this case the IES, they're related, who quoted by saying never let a good crisis go to waste. But again, I think there's two different definitions. Their idea of a crisis is this gap, profits. This idea of a crisis is students are being so stretched that they're sick. Yeah? Maybe. Okay. Anyway, so what I suggest is, so you have business management systems that are creating the tests, interpreting the tests for you, and then disseminating the results of those tests, always using fear to make you feel afraid that this gap is being closed because there's something wrong with you. And so the summary is skills, motivation, knowledge, environment, and communication. Well, how about this? How about, here's what I'd like to say, and you're welcome to repeat this. How about give kids the skills that are actually going to help them today? You want motivation? Then give them something to motivate themselves with. What I mean is, besides something that's just because you have to do this, because I said so. Give them knowledge that they're actually going to be able to use. Give them an environment that's safe, that they can use this stuff with, and then give them a way to communicate. So what I'm saying, these learning gaps are no fault of students. How do you blame kids for this? It's the adults' fault. It's the adults' problem. But we seem to continually blame kids and use them as a weapon, I feel like, politically, economically, you name it. And so I'm not going anywhere. I'm just going to continue this little service because I'm not hired by any educational product anymore. I don't get paid for any of this. I'm genuinely doing this because I care for kids. I care for students. And so I'm going to keep doing this until you trust me. I'm going to do it. Maybe get a little crazier. But what's crazier than this? That I think students deserve a free public education. Maybe not devoid of bias because we're human, but at least kind of a blinded justice system, right? Where it's like, let's take different points of view. You will figure it out, but at least give kids the opportunity where you don't have to buy an education that isn't really an education because you're being held down. And why wouldn't you? Because business management systems make more money if you are held down. Okay, ciao for now.